So I guess I gotta start with basically what is Unity. Unity is a C++ application that is you basically has the UI stuff that you can do with. There's also the compilers of the scripting languages that you use. For example, if you're using C#, then there's the Mono compiler that we talked about. And then you run your scripts here. So this is pretty much what you create. And you use UI to like kind of create scripty stuff but it's in the back end, you know. Not back end, but like you don't see the stuff and you just add stuff. Anyways, so everything in Unity that you create or add to the project is called a game object. That's the primitive type of all Unity stuff. So everything that you create there, it's like, you know, Java has object. I think that's also
everything's derived from game object.
So everything's derived from game object, and you add a script to it, and scripts are basically inherent from game object. And game object has a lot of cool stuff. Like there's game object. Of course, inside your own script, you just write this or just write it right away. A game object dot, what else? There's translations or transformation. There's dot position. So now you can get the position of the object in the 3D space. You can read like X, Y, Z. You can get the coordinates of the object that you have. You can also move the object, velocity. Velocity is something different. There's also game object, which is cool. If you add, there's a property called rigid body, kind of like a physics property you can add to the game object, and then you start having rigid body. And here you can add basically velocities. You can like check the velocity of an object. You can do all sort of operations like give it force, give it whatever, you know, like all of these things. You'll just get a drop-down menu of a lot of functions. So that's what's so cool about scripting with Unity. Sometimes you press dot and then you get like series of things and you're just like, oh, what can I do with this thing? You know, it's like what's available to me. And you'll find a lot of things that are pre-made that you can just use. A lot of math functions, a lot of different things that you just add to the object and it works. And people wrote it before, like you don't need to like recreate everything.
Well, now what about the physics mechanics of the actual, it's like, let's say I actually wanted to do, how does it handle like traditional, say like the sprite type, you know, in 2D programming where you...
Well, usually people create planes, like when you, pretty much when you open up Unity, you get like an inspector thing.
Got it right
on the side. If you get yeah, it is there, but I gotta like,
yeah.
draw it for people to see.
I know.
If you click, like, let's say here's your thing, and here's whatever, here's your assets, and here's an inspector. It kind of gives you the properties of the object that you've chosen. So, like, you've chosen an object here, and it gives you like all the properties that are active now on this object. You can add, like I said, a rigid body. So that when you add a rigid body, that means the physics of it will apply physics to the object. So if you set gravity in the project as a whole to be 10, you know, minus 10 on the y-axis, then anything that has a rigid body component will start dropping with gravity. Yeah, so we can add a lot of things there, including your behaviors that you create, which is the scripts that you do. So the script that you do, you just basically add it, and it just adds a new property that you have defined in your scripts. For example, if you started to create, let's say, a player mechanic where I'm in a 2D plane, walking platformer Mario style, and you wanted to, you know, define the jumping, you define the walking, you define how fast you're gonna go and all of that, and you create that in a script. You add it here and it becomes like player script. And what's cool about these scripts is that if you create a public variable, it becomes available here and you can modify it. So instead of going back to the script and changing it, you can just like, oh, change this value, run, and it will just get that value. That one makes Unity cool, is that if you structure your own scripts really nicely, you can really just start giving, if you're working with a game designer, for example, you can just give him the project and tell him all the properties are on the side, go play with it, go nuts. I programmed this like amazing physics. You can do a lot of things with it, and this character has complex movements, but I don't know how how the walking speed should be optimal for your game design or anything like that. Then you just like program it and you throw it to him and he'll experiment with it. Add a collider from the menus and put it here, and then you can like define how big a collider is, and you can see in the inspector thing like kind of a wireframe of the collider, so you can like get it to the exact size that you want. And yeah, and you just click play and there's something happening. You know, that's what's so cool about Unity. What else can I talk about? Any things that you guys want me to talk about?
Can you test deployments on mobile, like on device?
Yes, you can. It's a bit harder. Yeah, you can do that. And if you have a debug, like a log out thing that you wrote, debug.log, whenever you put a message there, you will see it here. If you plug in your Android, iOS is kind of a pain. Yeah. It always is. But with Android, you can just plug it in, and you have to like run it and actually build the project. But tell it build and run, and check debug mode on when you're actually like pressing run. And it would give the information back if it's plugged in to the debugger, and you can see a lot of stuff. And what I also think that they developed with the newer version of version 4 is that they improved on the what they call profiling tool, where you can basically see the game running, and you can see where the spikes in CPU and where the spikes in GPU, and it could be like, oh, I know. Like, I'm doing this in this script, and that's like just a resource hog. Maybe I should fix that somehow so it doesn't take as much resources. All of these things are in Unity, and it runs perfectly on Android. iOS is kind of a pain. I haven't.
And do you have to have like a developer license or a hardware license for iOS itself, like the $100 developer?
Yeah, of course. What's funny about iOS is when you click build for iOS, it will turn it into an Xcode project.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Because it's C++, it'll just export the whole thing into Xcode, and then you compile from Xcode. So I don't know how things go with Xcode. There's probably something there that you can use. I'm not really sure.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah. There's a live device like emulator or whatever.
Yeah. This one I do know is that it has this layer, and then when it produces that library for Xcode, you can do a bunch of stuff to it actually that you can't do until you get over to Xcode.
Yeah.
Like implement New Relic. And then also you can run it on an emulator there, but the problem is that the logging that comes out of it within Xcode may not be what you really want. So that's when you get to really hassle town, because you'll start to get something like whatever little script update that is just totally normal, like Exposition, will suddenly start logging completely to Xcode because it can't be as intelligent as the whatever your actual framework logging is.
Yeah, so most of the work I do is basically adding properties that are available to me. Like I can just see the the actual drop-down menus, and they like insert, oh, there's like a physics module. Okay, what's there? There's a bunch of physics stuff like lights, whatever, and they all get added. And then you just play with the properties and see how it works. Like all what I do is I make one-player script for myself. That's how the character moves. And in a rigid body, basically, so like inside the player asset, I can access properties here. So I can just say, in this object that I'm in, go to the rigid body property and add velocity, or do whatever. And that's pretty much most of what I do, is just play with rigid body and transformation and positioning and stuff until I come up with an interesting mechanic. And that's most of the work that you're going to do with Unity, is basically this thing.
I like the way that Unity approaches attaching scripts to objects. It's kind of a backwards way of thinking when I start looking at it, but it's really flexible. So instead of trying to create this object hierarchy, you just create these very flexible scripts and just attach them to whatever objects need them on the screen.
And what's cool, like I said, you can access things and other objects through the scripting too. What I like, for example, I always create like an object that is invisible. It doesn't appear there at all, and it's called Game Manager. And that's where I calculate, how many lives I have, how many, did the guy reach the that's how 2D Framework does it.
Yeah, and you can like simulate, I forgot what the effect's called, it's not mid-mapping.
Parallax.
Parallax, yeah.
Parallax.
Where like you have another plane in the background scrolls at a slower rate.
Yeah. And of course you can also change, I don't know if you guys are familiar with cameras, orthographic and perspective cameras. Orthographic is like exactly 2D, so you can create a game that's like, looks exactly like Super Nintendo style 3D. Or you can create stuff that is like, no, give me a camera that can catch perspective. And with that, I can do like much more like, oh, I can go to the foreground, and come to the background, and stuff like that. And what's really cool is the asset store. The asset store was really where Unity shines in a lot of ways. Man, sometimes I just go online and decide like, okay, I want a model that does this, and I just look on like in the asset store. It's like, this is exactly the model that I need, or this is the model that I will put in place just until I find an artist, that would actually do this for me. And I just put anything there and just get it done until somebody joins the project that actually can fix that. I am working with something from the asset store that I found called UniVenture. It's a camera that's kind of like the 2D Zelda old school style, and I love those games, and it's ready. The camera system is there. I actually use it for presentations to impress people, and it's great. I just put some text in the background and just like go to different rooms, and you can see different tests. Nice. And I'm like playing it with a PlayStation joystick, and I love it. So yeah, Unity you can even use it for not just games. You can actually use it to make apps. If you want to make an app that's creative and like you can tap into 3D capabilities of phones, you can do that. It can really do creative apps. Or presentations like I did. So yeah, you can play with textures and stuff like that. And there's a lot of cool things at the asset store. Friends of mine have a startup that they just moved to San Francisco. They create modeling tools inside of Unity. So you don't need like to go into Maya or 3D Max to like create the models that you want. They also support 2D. They support a lot of cool stuff there. So yeah, all of these things. I think you opened up Playmaker and 2D Toolkit.
Well, I didn't have Playmaker open, but I have Unity on here, and I was just trying to follow you.
2D Toolkit is great. I like it. It does a cool thing that I really like. Usually with 2D games, well, if you're loading like a texture every time an object is being drawn from so every time you're drawing a character per frame, you're drawing the texture again and again and again. So if you have like different, like 50 objects on screen, but they are all, excuse me, they're all using different textures, at the end you're going to have 50 draw calls, and that is pretty heavy on the GPU.
Can you sprite map and offset?
Yeah. That's exactly what 2D Toolkit does.
Okay.
It's one draw call for all of those. So that's kind of cool. So like there's a lot of things, that's why I like the asset store instead of like writing stuff myself, because I'll never be that smart to like do that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean...
Yeah, like, I just want to make games, like I really don't want to work
to split those images, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of people who do stuff that like can help you out. But yeah, most of the work you're going to do is basically on transformation and rigid body. If you're doing physics. If you want to do like just straight up transformations, then you don't need to even worry about rigid body. But I like it. It adds like a smoothness to it. All of that. And you can find a lot of people who already wrote code online. And if you're using Playmaker, I was talking about Playmaker earlier. Playmaker is a plugin that turns Unity into just a block thing, like logical blocks, and like connect them to each other. And there's like a lot of other plugins on the Unity Asset Store that work on Playmaker, so you don't even need to know how to code. You just like build logic blocks and get with it. And it's pretty popular. And there's a game by Glue Mobile called Dueling Blades. It was made by Playmaker completely.
So yeah, anything you guys want to know more?
I got a question for you.
Go.
The game I'm working on, I've kind of gone back and forth. Do I want to let Unity handle all of the, just really tap into the physics aspect of it, and build my character up with, okay, this is, you know, how much gravity you have and how much mass and yada yada yada, versus just controlling things. Okay, you're moving to this point and you know, drawing the arc of where you're going to go. Is it a big performance hit to use? Which way do you tend to go on that? And is it a big performance hit to use?
I think phones these days are pretty powerful, especially the higher end ones. I mean, the Galaxy S3 is one of the most sold phones out there, so if you want to sell a game, those are your bet for them to buy your game, the guys who are getting the top end phones. And it's the most sold phone in the world right now. So it's a powerful quad-core device. It can handle it, pretty sure, especially like with Tegra 4 coming out now, and like the new Snapdragon processors too. Yeah, it's okay. You can use the physics engine without taking that much of a hit, unless you're doing just extremely crazy stuff. That's different.
Yeah, I'm not dropping like 100 balls or
exactly. Like, even that will handle. Like it will handle that, especially with primitive shapes.
Yeah.
It will handle it pretty well. It's optimized. It's they're using NVIDIA's physics engine, so it's optimized for GPUs and stuff like that. It's not going to be heavy on the CPU, and the GPU is usually not doing anything anyways.
Okay.
Any more questions?